Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this training of the East Africa Law Society. We would like to recognize all the participants that are now already clocked in. We have more than 50 already online. We are expecting about 200. So this is quite a big call. So this partnership has been organized by the East Africa Law Society in partnership with the Leading Law Firms Forum. This is the premier forum for leading law firms in the region. And I believe all of us have been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. I think all facets of our economies, all types of businesses, and virtually everyone has been impacted by the pandemic, and law firms have not been left behind. In fact, we have received numerous calls from various firms across the region saying they have been really hit hard, and in fact, some firms have had to either reduce salaries for staff or in very dire circumstances, lay off a few staff, which is very unfortunate. So we thought, why don't we organize a session where law firms can, leading law firms in the region can then share how they've been able to manage the crisis. As you know, big firms have big resources, and most of them have been able to survive quite well. And we thought, what about emerging firms? What about that small firm with a small office somewhere in Kigali or in Kampala or in Dar es Salaam that is just starting up? What problem is it facing? How can it be mentored? So this session is basically to look at, to share knowledge and information between the leading firms and all other firms in the region on how they've been able to cope and how they've been able to, what strategies they've employed to maintain business flow and to ensure basically we have a semblance of normalcy in times of a crisis. So I will not want to speak for long. We have a moderator for this session, and I would like to call upon Ms. Barbara Maloa. Ms. Barbara Maloa is our Deputy Secretary General and the Young Lawyers Representative to the East Africa Law Society Governing Council. She'll be moderating today's session. I'm aware she also has an emerging firm. So Ms. Maloa, please take over and guide the next, the proceedings going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, East Africa Law members. I hope you're all keeping well, despite the circumstances we find ourselves facing. Thank you for sparing time to join us in this webinar today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my fellow council members who have also joined us, starting with our president, President Willy Rubert from Burundi. You're welcome. Our Vice President, Sarah from Tanzania, you're welcome. Our Secretary General, Asmahani Sad from Uganda. Our Treasurer, Maggie Baigana from Rwanda. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome the leaders from the various national bars. From Kenya, our President, Mr. Nelson Havi, you're welcome. From Uganda, SP Chinobe, you're welcome. From Rwanda, Batonia Julien Kabaruganda, welcome. From Zanzibar Law Society, Slim Abdallah, you're welcome. Batonia Rugemeleza from Burundi, you're all welcome. Once again, thank you for taking time to join us in this webinar. One of the objectives of the East Africa Law Society is to develop capacity of the legal profession to respond to emerging challenges, business, governance, and trade, amongst others. In line with that, we deemed it fit to bring this particular webinar, which is powered by our leading law firms. The topic we will tackle today, the main topic is law firm management in times of crisis. Law firm management in times of crisis. With that said, let me proceed to introduce our panel of speakers. We have Mr. Richard Hani. Mr. Richard Hani is a member of the Partnership Board of the Pan-African Law Firm Bowmans, and he's also the managing partner of the Kenya office Coulson and Hani LLP. Mr. Hani is consistently involved in most prominent transactions within the region. He has a wide array of experience in advising domestic, regional, and international clients on mergers and acquisitions, deals, capital markets, finance, restructuring, and corporate law. He's also listed in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame and a Tier 1 lawyer in Chambers Global, where clients acknowledge that he has a good feel for what is and isn't practical in Kenya and for how it will work in the local environment. Welcome, Mr. Hani. We're delighted to have you here with us. Our next speaker is a lovely lady by the name of Miss Caroline Mutunga Karaoke. She is the CEO and lead consultant at Totally Sorted Limited, which is a legal practice management consultancy firm that provides firms with solutions and advice in law firm management and business strategy. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with over 15 years experience and has previously worked with HHM in Kenya, Iseme, Kamau, and Maema, and the African Legal Network, where in all three firms, she was involved in improving the management system. She has a Master of Science in Legal Administration and is also a graduate of the Global 10,000 Women Program by Goldman Sachs in USIU Africa. Welcome, Carol. We are happy to have you here. Join us, and we look forward to invaluable lessons that you'll impart on us today. Welcome, Mr. Hani. At this point, we can proceed. You can start us off with the first subtopic of the day.
Okay, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Good. Hello, everybody. I've had my introduction, so I don't need to say any more about that, but I would like to thank the East African Law Society for putting on this very important webinar this afternoon and for organizing for so many people to join. I hope that some of the remarks I make and others following me will be useful to you. I have not done a presentation, so I'm just going to make some remarks, and I'm obviously happy for people to send in questions, and we will try to answer them as we go along or towards the end. I'll leave that in the hands of the organizers and moderator, Barbara. I think here we are several weeks into the crisis now, more than 3 months, and many of us are still wondering how and when it's going to come to an end. And I think the sort of opening statement is really that, not surprisingly, we don't have a firm answer to that, and that's why we're all looking around for what we should be doing and how we should plan for the future. I think, first of all, obviously, the COVID, I don't need to say a lot about it. It is first and foremost a global health crisis. But having started as a global health crisis, it has now morphed into and become a very serious global economic crisis, affecting almost everybody on the planet, which is truly unprecedented. So what we need to do now, though, of course, is to avoid all of this becoming a business crisis for you as individuals and as advocates, lawyers, partners in law firms, associates, and other people working in law firms. We need to try to avoid it becoming a business crisis for you. I've been asked to talk about two things. Firstly, the impact and COVID and how to cope with the COVID pandemic and its impact on your firm. And secondly, on crisis management in law firms. Now, in many ways, my remarks actually sort of blend into one another. The two, given the current situation, the two are really very closely connected. So I will probably make remarks about how to manage a crisis or crisis management in a law firm as we go through the first part, which is I'll be focusing a little bit more on what the COVID impact has been. Obviously, I'm talking from my own experience, the experience I've gained over the last 3 months, working here in Nairobi and working with my colleagues in our other offices in Bowmans, which is South Africa, Uganda, and Tanzania here in East Africa. And also we spent a lot of time talking with our colleagues in some of the international law firms, and we've gained some insights from their experiences as well. And obviously, I'm sure the same goes for all of you. You've all been involved in webinars, conferences, online, reading, following the media, and of course, talking with one another. So I doubt very much whether what I'm going to say is going to come as any particular surprise to you. There are no, I'm afraid, golden nuggets. I don't have a silver bullet which sort of answers all the problems and means that you can all relax and everything is going to return to normal and we'll all be happy. I'm afraid there is no such silver bullet, and we are, of course, feeling our way as we go. I think it's important to start with having some guiding principles about the way in which you want your practice and your law firm to run in a crisis like this. Clearly, it's a health crisis, and so the well-being of your staff is the most important and priority aspect. And we in Kenya, in our office in Nairobi, we were very successful, I think, in managing a very swift evacuation, if you like, of the office, moving from everybody coming into work, people spending their day going backwards and forwards to the law courts, to the registries, and all the other things that us lawyers in this part of the world have become so accustomed to and a part of our daily lives. So we've had to put all that to one side and move to work mostly from home, although as I'm sure with a lot of you, the office is still open and people are still going in there on a very limited basis. So the health and well-being of your staff is the priority, to make sure that the health measures that have been recommended by your government, by the health authorities, by the World Health Organization and so forth are being adopted, because we want to make sure that this pandemic doesn't affect us as individuals and the people we work with, and of course their families and so forth. And then the third guiding principle is always that we're here as a service industry and we have to maintain contact and look after our clients to the very best of our ability in these changed circumstances. And of course, that's not easy to do. And I'm sure that some of you have got challenges in that. And of course, if you have particular observations about how that's gone over the last 3 months, please let the organizers know. It'd be interesting to get feedback on how you found interacting with your clients. Another thing that's important to do is to establish, and this applies whether it is a health crisis like COVID or whether it is some other sort of crisis that's affecting one's ability to operate as a law firm. That is to set up a task, what we call a task team. And you should have a task team and people assigned to that task team on a rotational basis. As each year goes by, you should review your preparedness and readiness to manage crises and make sure that the people who are given responsibility for helping to manage the task have the necessary training and understanding of how to respond. We set up a crisis committee comprising of the senior business leaders in Kenya, IT, business development, operations, finance, as well as representation from the partnership itself. So the sort of immediate crisis of managing the what should happen to the staff, what happens to the office, setting up, dealing with the technology transition from working in the office to remote working. All of those things fell under the scope of the operations team. And that's overseen, in our case, by a COVID task team, which comprises mostly partners drawn from our various offices, where we are comparing notes with one another about the different impact of the pandemic in each country, and learning from one another on the best way to manage it in terms of our own office. Internal communications is another key component. Not only as the crisis unfolded in the first week or two, to reassure people that business was continuing, that there was no immediate fear that things were going to shut down or they were going to lose their job. And then, obviously, as we move forward, continuing communication with our staff. As I said, many of them working or spending more time at home and feeling a bit out of touch with what's going on. So we obviously have WhatsApp groups with individual teams within the office in terms of the lawyers. We have WhatsApp groups dealing with operational matters, and we have WhatsApp groups dealing with IT and so on. And then we have regular Zoom calls. So we use Zoom, others use Microsoft Teams, whatever it is. Set up regular team discussions to update one another on developments with clients, on challenges with working, and so forth. And of course, all of this goes without saying that you have to have a reliable and robust technology backbone that will support all of these activities. Clearly, for smaller law firms with more limited resources or fewer people, these kind of things can be a significant challenge. I think that's where organisations like the Law Society and other trade bodies that you are familiar with can provide you with guidance and assistance. The most important thing, of course, is to make sure that your technology works, that you can work from home, and also that your data is being protected from cyber attacks, and your data is also being stored and backed up in a logical and orderly fashion so that it can be retrieved. So working, the office regime that we currently are operating, as I mentioned, is our office is open still. The doors are open, you can go in there. You won't find many people there, but we think it's important that since the government in Kenya has not forced people to lock down and work only from home and people to close their offices. There are other closures, of course, like restaurants, hotels, and so forth. But you know, business offices have not been ordered to shut, although in practice, as I said, most people are now working from home. And you know, as the weeks have gone by, we found that some people like to go into the office and spend time there. We're managing the number of people who go in. We're making sure that those who do go in are observing the health and safety requirements. And I won't go into all of that. I'm sure you're all very familiar with masks and social distancing and all that stuff. We're also looking at introducing a program of office rotations. That's to say, some teams or parts of teams will be going into the office on a more structured basis to work from there, while other members of the team or other teams remain working at home, so as not to have too many people in the building at the same time. There's a lot of logistical challenges with that, and we at Kulsanhani Bowmans in Nairobi are about to launch that process in the next week or so, because I do feel, and maybe I'm speculating that a bit, but I do feel that even if in Kenya the government restrictions on movement are lifted in a couple of weeks' time, I don't think we're going to be in a position where everybody's just going to be able to return to work and we go back to where we were before. We are going to have to face the reality of continued remote working and people spending more time at home and not having the same level of presence in the office as we had before, at least for the time being. And that could be another 3 months. It could be even longer. It depends very much on how the pandemic unfolds. Clearly, managing, having an office and being able to operate from an office is critical, because there are a lot of services that people operate in law firms that are there to support clients and the lawyers who work in the law firm. So clearly, mail, deliveries, reception, switchboard, printing of documentation, all of those services still need to go on. And the way we've done it is that we have a series of people in the office who are able to receive messages, organize deliveries, prepare documentation, and have it ferried around to either to client offices or to lawyers at home or whatever is necessary. Of course, technology is helping a great deal with the practice of law, and that's been unfolding for many years now. So, recent changes in the law in Kenya that mean that people don't have to use company seals on documents may seem relatively negligible, but actually when you have to get a document sealed and it needs to be driven around Nairobi while somebody finds the company secretary with the seal, and then all of those sort of logistical things are being eased through changes in legislation here in Kenya to make it easier. And that's not in response to COVID, by the way. Other things, of course, like courts, online hearings, that the judiciary in Kenya has been very proactive in the last few months in starting up court hearings and dealing with things through webinars, or I'm not quite sure what they call them in the courts because I'm not a court lawyer, but the use of technology to allow the wheels of justice to continue to spin is very important. And I think we in East Africa have shown that we're at the forefront globally of the use of technology in so many different ways. And so whilst things have taken a lot of time to get used to, and maybe things are not going as quickly as we would like them to, not everything has come to a grinding halt. I think just last point on offices, it's very important, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that your servers, your computer servers, your backup systems are properly protected and properly secure. Very important to make sure that your premises are also physically protected and physically secure. Remembering that in many cases, a lot of law firms and lawyers keep client documentation, sometimes very important documentation like title deeds. They keep it in their offices, and it is critical to the welfare of your practice that you ensure that those materials are properly secured. So I've talked about. I also think it's necessary to have a help desk, a troubleshooting help desk for people, particularly on the IT front, but also in relation to HR issues, finance issues, and so forth. We have people in our office who are there to, as it were, take calls, deal with emails where people are challenged, lawyers and staff members are challenged through not being able to get the system to work quite in the way they wanted, and so on and so forth. So having a help desk is vital for internal operations. So I talked earlier on about keeping in touch and communications. I think that's very important. We have regular team meetings, either every day of the week or every alternate day, that each team gets together on a Zoom call and discusses progress. And obviously how things are going with clients and the work that we're doing and so forth. Well-being, I think, while this isn't necessarily strictly a sort of law firm issue, I think it has now moved to the very front of people's minds that even if you're in a law firm, we are all human beings and we all need to be looked after and to feel that we have leadership and to feel that we have guidance and people we can turn to. I think people have found in different ways, they found the changed circumstances, the uncertainty, the stress of not knowing for sure when things are going to return to some sort of normality, and worries about money and job security. These are all very much at the front of people's minds. And we've been making special efforts to reassure our staff and to reassure our lawyers that so far as we can and for as long as we can, it will be business as usual. Sensitivity also needs to be made to those who are working from home. It's not easy, as I'm sure many of you have found, particularly if you have other family members in your home or you're sharing a house, or particularly if you've got children who are going through home learning. These are all these kind of issues need to be managed, and we need to make due consideration to people's needs in that regard. We still want people to take leave, for example. It may seem counterintuitive to those of you who've been spending a lot of time at home in recent weeks and not being in the office. You may feel that you're always on leave. And so when I say to my lawyers and my staff, I say you should take some leave, I think a lot of people are a little bit nonplussed by that. But the reality is, from a law firm management point of view, we want people to take leave, both because it makes them take time off and rest, time for our family and other activities, but also it is an accrual in our obligations and in our financial commitments that people take leave. And if at the end of the year they haven't taken leave, then the question comes up as to what should be done with leave that's not being taken. I think many of you will, I'm sure, have found that there are many sources of information about well-being, as well as managing health and dealing with educational issues and learning through other sources, not just through your law firm. So the internet is awash with stuff. Many of you will have received hundreds of emails over the last several weeks with COVID-related tips, helplines, suggestions, courses, webinars, all sorts of many hundreds of things. And it's quite difficult to sift through all of that material and work out what is useful and what is beneficial. We in our firm have found that most of that stuff is to be ignored. We have a team of people who do sift through it and who spend time, as it were, filtering out the less helpful material and then providing an update once a week or every 2 weeks with links to what are considered to be helpful sources, so as to reduce the amount of time people spend looking at material online. And then two more things on how to respond in the current situation. One is, of course, clients, and you may be surprised that I haven't spoken about clients so far. Clients are at the heart of what we do. We have to remain very focused on managing and working for our clients and managing their legal affairs to the best of our ability, with efficiency and with integrity. But you have to understand the situation that clients are in too. Different sectors, different industries, whether it's in banking or whether it's in farming, whether it's in tourism, they're all being affected in different ways, but they're all being affected in one way or another. It's clearly a worrying time for us lawyers, because a lot of us feel that clients are going to stop using lawyers, and they no longer need lawyers just because we don't have a functioning office where everybody sits around in long meetings discussing projects, deals, and issues and problems, or preparing to go to court and so forth. But I think whilst there has been a hiatus and slowdown in activity, and clients have taken time to adjust themselves and their own business, I do think that in time, a lot of the legal work that we've been doing will return, and quite possibly there'll be even more than there was before. So my feeling is at the moment we're in a little bit of a lull between the work that we were so busy doing, last year, earlier this year, and even up until perhaps a few weeks ago. Whilst clients regroup and business, as it were, restructures itself and redefines how it's going to go forward, and then I think there will be a lot of additional work. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep in touch with your clients. In fact, it's critical that you do. However, what we're hearing is that clients are pretty fed up of getting endless COVID mail shots and news flashes from their lawyers telling them about the latest innovation or idea they've got about how to deal with COVID and so forth. It is a difficult balance because you do want to keep in touch with them. You do want to let them know you're still there. You do want to let them know that you are aware of the challenges that their sector that they may be facing, and that in some ways you are there to help or provide legal advice should they need it. But I think keeping in touch with them doesn't necessarily mean sort of blasting out news flashes 3 or 4 times a day to clients, because what happens when they get fed up with it, they just click the junk mail or block your mail as spam, and your whole effort becomes fruitless and pointless. So webinars and events, I think webinars are probably a good way, and get clients involved in your webinars. Don't just sit there and lecture your clients about the latest developments or what's going on. Get your client on a panel, get them to talk. Even have Zoom calls with groups of your clients and you as a moderator, much as we are today. Maybe have 4, 10 or 20 people who you're able to connect with and persuade them to sit around and create a think tank, brainstorm, share ideas, share problems. It's not necessarily going to produce a ton of legal work for you, but it's certainly going to maintain your relationship with the individuals concerned. And then finances. Many of you, I'm sure, will be wondering when things are going to return to normal and when the money can start rolling in the way that it was before. Let me tell you now that that's not going to happen, at least not for the foreseeable future. I think we have to live for the time being, and I really wish I could give you whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months, I don't know, but we have to live with the fact that we are going to be on reduced circumstances for some while yet. Clients have pulled back, they are saving. Everybody said when this crisis broke, the first thing you've got to do is cut your costs. And in all but essential crises, most legal advice is not considered to be a primary requirement for many clients, particularly those in the private sector, particularly those in private individuals. They may decide that they're not going to move house. They may decide that they don't want to buy that parcel of land for the time being. They may decide that they'll hold off on going to court in that dispute, wait to see how things turn out. And of course, that means that less work for us as lawyers. So it's very important for you to conserve cash. You yourselves will have cut your costs. You'll either have cut them deliberately by cutting back, or you won't be spending as much money as you were. So for example, on transportation, you won't be spending money on going to expensive law society conferences, whether it's in Dar es Salaam or Mombasa or Kampala. You're not traveling. Clearly we can't at the moment. So those are cost savings which have kind of fallen on you, and that will help. But focus too on collections, focus on billing, focus on maintaining contact with the clients, as I said a moment ago, because the friendlier you are, the more helpful you are to your clients, the more willing they're going to be to part with money and meet you, pay their bills for you. Is it necessary to reduce your fixed overheads like your rent, to reduce your salaries and to make your staff redundant? I mean, I personally, I think that's really a decision for the partnership and for the individuals concerned. It depends on individual circumstances of each law firm. So I'm not here to say that's what you have to do. Our view in our firm is that if we ever get to the point where we have to cut people's salaries or we have to lay people off, then really we are looking at a very, very, very unhappy and gloomy scenario. And we are by no means at that point at the moment. And I'm happy to say that we have not even implemented a unpaid leave policy. We've not implemented pay cuts, except for some of the partners have agreed to reduction in drawings. But otherwise, we are continuing to pay our staff in full. But don't, on the other hand, even if, you can do that as long as you've got the cash. If you don't have the cash, I don't recommend that you go to the bank and borrow a ton of money to pay your staff or to pay your landlord or so forth. You need to think very carefully before you borrow money, because effectively you're only adding to the pile of liabilities and obligations that you're going to face. And one day, the reckoning will come and you'll have to meet those claims. So what is the long-term impact? I'm just about to end on this subject. What is the long-term impact of the COVID pandemic and the way things have been, the unexpected crisis that has come upon us? Again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm certainly no soothsayer, but I do think that there are going to be some major changes in our work practices, and I think probably we'll find that the law firm of old, which I alluded to earlier, of lawyers being robed and bewigged, lawyers in suits, lawyers in offices, fancy or not, lawyers spending time lolling in court corridors, waiting to go in for hearings, and so forth, writing learned opinions, and so forth. I think in many respects that we were undergoing transition as a profession in the last few years, mainly as a result of two things: technology, mostly, and secondly, competition. And I think working practices were changing. And I think what's happened with COVID is that the pace in which the changes on our profession has simply been accelerated, and accelerated very, very fast, and in a way that is making us very uncomfortable, quite understandably. So remote working is probably here to stay. That doesn't mean that we won't have an office. It just means that more of us will spend more time working or finding ways that we can produce the same quality of work and the same quality of service for our clients, but not necessarily from a desk in an office in a central business district or whatever. So the need for office space may reduce. You may find that not having an office at all is the way to go. I personally think that is the wrong way to go. I think, for a law firm, I think we're a people business. We're people in terms of our clients, and we're people in terms of the staff and the people in the office. So the social side of what we do is so important to us as human beings that I really think it's very unlikely that the day will come that really law firms don't really exist except in a virtual manner. And if there is, maybe I won't still be in practice by then in any case, but nonetheless, I think the use of technology has to be to facilitate and enable our business, not necessarily to replace us as lawyers and to replace what we contribute to the world of business and to society at large. A lot of what we know as lawyers used to come from libraries and books and from sitting at the feet of learned senior partners and learning from them. But now, of course, so much is available online. And I think that more and more of legal resource and more clients will actually be tapping online resources. And the role of lawyers is going to change from being people who read the law, interpret it, and apply it for clients, to people who help clients understand the bigger context in which laws are made and why laws are what they are, and to add the many layers of experience that we as lawyers get from the practice of law, which of course clients don't see. And so, as I'm sure a lot of you find, you get clients, or you get other lawyers sending from overseas saying, well, we've read all your laws on land law, and we understand section 32 subsection 3 says the following, and they've looked it all up and they've done half your job for you already. So we need to find ways in which to continue to make ourselves relevant. And so I think, as I said earlier, I think the days of wigs and gowns and quill pens, the days of parchment paper and red ink and seals are probably history already, and if they're not, they soon will be. So the new norm, of course, is going to be more technology. It's going to be, sadly, it's going to be less one-on-one interaction with people. Maybe even if we find a vaccine and a cure for COVID, we will go back, but I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. And then the long-term economic impact on everybody, not just lawyers, but we're part of the machinery that makes the economy work, is going to be long and is going to be painful. And so I think lawyers need to also retool and reconsider new areas of practice, or indeed looking at things like mergers and getting together in a more corporate structure, and lining up together as opposed to working as individual partners. I think we need to do a lot of retraining, and indeed, we see some law firms are diversifying away from sort of being pure law firms in the traditional sense to adding in additional services, whether it's tax or whether it is corporate services, whether it is advisory services, and forensic investigation work, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to look away from the traditional areas of legal practice and embrace a wider spectrum where we are providing business support services. I'm saying this all, of course, very much with the hat of a man who spent his career working in the world of business as a lawyer, and I appreciate that that doesn't necessarily hold true to all aspects of legal practice. For example, human rights, necessarily to matrimonial and family law issues, and so on and so forth. So there are different strings and aspects to the law which perhaps I'm not addressing fully, only because I really don't have a lot of expertise in that area. So, I mean, I think we as lawyers still have a future, but I think we're going to have to change, and the COVID crisis has forced us to start thinking very carefully. And if indeed you've got time on your hands at the moment, you've perhaps got a little less work than you would like, that doesn't mean it's time to go out and play golf. I think it's time to connect with your colleagues, your peers, your competition, and work out ways in which we can make ourselves relevant for the future. Okay, so disaster management or crisis management. I think I've kind of touched on most of those topics in the remarks I've made so far. And I think you've got to remember, though, when it comes to crisis management, it can take many different forms. A crisis that affects a lawyer or a law firm can be, as we have seen, and very close up and personal, a COVID related or a global health crisis. But it can be other kinds of crisis too. There can be things like civil war and unrest, and government restrictions placed for security measures. Dare I say it, I hope it'll never happen again in this part of the world, but the sort of thing like a coup or a military occupation. What happens to the legal profession in that scenario? What happens if there are? I think it's less likely that we're going to be affected by climate change in terms of whether we can continue to be lawyers. I certainly hope not. If it does happen, it'll be many hundreds of years before the world is burned up or hit by a meteorite. So I'm not really dealing with those kind of crises. But then there are internal crises. So you've got the external factors that can impact the way in which your business can operate. But then you've got the internal crises. You've got the scenario where one or more key partners retires or resigns, where you haven't planned for your succession, and suddenly there's a void and nobody quite knows what's happening, and your clients lose confidence in the firm. or when a team defects, when lawyers move, either one or several of them move en masse to go and work for a competitor. Those kind of things have happened more in Kenya in recent years than was ever seen before, and it's still nothing like the pace at which these things happen in larger financial markets like Dubai or Hong Kong or London, but it certainly has happened a bit. And in some ways, those can be a crisis, because you could suddenly find that you know, half your banking team is left, or half of your intellectual property specialists have walked out the door and gone down the road to work for a competitor. So you know, in those scenarios, what do you do? And sorry, maybe one other type of crisis, which I think is one that maybe I'm not very well versed at dealing with, but I think it's one that's going to become more and more a problem, which is a reputational crisis, which is spurred or started as a result of social media. And you know, I have my own strong views on social media, which perhaps I won't explain in great detail here. But I do think, you know, I think it's a force for some good in the world, but I also think it's a force for significant danger and potential harm, because it's very easy to ruin someone's reputation with a tweet or a post on Facebook or whatever. Or a blog comment which gets picked up and goes viral. And I'm sure we've all seen it, hopefully not in our own personal lives, but certainly we've seen it happening. And the impact and the effect of that, whether on an individual or on a law firm, can be really fundamental, because at the end of the day, we trade not so much on our innate ability and on the fact that we've got experience as lawyers, all of those good things, which are very important. But we trade, I think, on the backbone of integrity and on reputation and goodwill. And if that is destroyed, then that can have a very serious impact on your business and create a crisis. So among the other things that I've talked about already, I think one or two other key things about what happens at a crisis, if a crisis breaks on you or on your law firm. You must have a communication strategy. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, you probably need to have a series of communication strategies prepared and kept on a shelf, as it were, and ready to be used in the event different types of crises should unfold. That requires planning, it requires foresight, and it probably requires help, maybe from an external agent. Sometimes people use public relations. Nowadays, there are crisis management consultants and so on and so forth. So having a number of different scenarios pre-planned as to how you would deal with a crisis should it hit you, so that you can respond quickly, because nowadays everything has to be done really very quickly. And if you lag behind, then either the social media world will tear you to shreds, or you'll find that you're behind the narrative and you're always struggling to get your side of the story heard, as it were. You have to confirm to your staff, you have to confirm to your clients and to your contacts and the market as a whole that you're in control and you understand the problem and that you're going to deal with the problem, whatever it may be. And that requires, again, leadership, and it requires effective communication. So I think on top, there's two or three remarks I just wanted to add to sort of the other things about being ready to deal with a crisis, having communications internally, keeping in touch with your people, looking after the well-being of your staff, managing your finances, and of course, looking after your clients. So I hope that what I've said has been useful and helpful, and I think that's probably enough. Looking at the clock, I've probably slightly overrun my time, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and deal with them. But I'd like to now pass back to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hani. That was very insightful. Just speaking from what you said, before I go to the questions, you've mentioned that and acknowledged that this is the time for technological transition. And one of the suggestions you've made is the various bar associations can assist emerging firms. Of course, there are these small firms that are not able to do some of these things now. They don't have the muscle. So maybe you could expound on how the bar associations, the various societies within the region can assist their lawyers. Secondly, there's a question from Amisha. You've talked about communicating with clients through Zoom calls or members of the office. Her question is, how are you dealing with cybersecurity where you are now, working mainly online and having Zoom meetings? Or on other platforms. And then there's also a question from Daniel from Tanzania. And he states that part of his practice is in litigation, and his short experience with online court proceedings is that the same is limited to procedural hearings and orders. In actual trial processes, we are forced to do filler meetings because of the challenges around witness management and evidence control. So he asks, are there ways in which the courts can tap technology more to reduce physical meetings? Members, you can send in your questions. Continue sending in your questions. You can raise your hand and I'll select you so that if any other person has a question for Mr. Hani before we move on to our next speaker. Mr. Hani, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for those. I'll try and answer them. I'm not sure I'm particularly well qualified on any of those counts. Bar associations, I mean, that's my suggestion. I'd rather throw that one back to East African Law Society, but to my mind, I would have thought that the Law Society ought to be able to tap the resources and expertise of firms like ourselves, maybe the larger firms, to provide a know-how forum in which smaller law firms and individual advocates can learn from how what systems and what are the best ways in which technology can be applied given the scale and size of the practice. So I think there's an interaction that can go on, and then that learning can be passed down. Cybersecurity, really not qualified. I do know that you know everything that we do in our law firm goes through a central server and goes through an ISP, an internet service provider, and then the entire network, if you'd like, is very, very carefully controlled and very carefully monitored for cyber attacks and hacking and other things. And I'm happy to say that so far we have not been the subject of a cyber attack or hacking. But of course, that does come at a significant cost in terms of having the technology in place or the software in place to fight the war of cybersecurity. And then litigation, again, not my area, but I think, as I've said a couple of times during my remarks, I do think that this is an evolving area. And whilst, you know, a few weeks ago, even I'm not sure the courts were doing any kind of online hearings, whether it's procedural or otherwise. They're now doing that. Let us, over the next few months, continue to urge the judiciary in all our countries to invest in technology, to invest in training, and that will allow the use of more substantive hearings, witness hearings, and so forth, in a properly managed and secure way, which works in the interests of the people involved and, of course, in the interests of justice. So I think we're only at the start of that process, but I'm sure that there's much learning that can be had from jurisdictions like the United States and Western Europe, where a lot of these things have been going on for quite some time. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hani. Maybe before we move on to Carol, there's one more question from one of the attendees. You could answer this. There's an issue raised on costs. Right now, as you said, everyone across the region or the world is affected by this pandemic. How do you cut on costs? You need to keep your office running and pay rent, pay salaries, and there's not much work. If clients are not bringing in as much work because they also don't have the financial muscle. As lawyers, how do we diversify?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it is time for law firms and lawyers to start looking at diversifying. It's a tricky one because we're regulated. We are supposedly restricted in the kind of activities that we can fulfill, and maybe this time now to start looking and talking to the regulators and the legislators about allowing lawyers to branch into different areas of professional services, or indeed to merge with other service providers. So diversifying your potential revenue base is one way to help to meet the cost. Now, that doesn't answer your current cash crisis. I appreciate that. I would imagine that quite a lot of people have already approached their landlord if they have an office and have asked for some kind of reprieve on rent. So that is usually a very significant element of cost. You can ask partners to accept a reduction in the amount of money that they're taking out of the firm every month, and so you leave some money in the firm in your partner loan account, which can be used to fund the sort of basic key activities, which will, of course, are maintaining your office open in some shape or form, paying your staff, and effectively keeping the lights on in one shape or another. But it is a challenge. There's no question about it. I wish I had, as I've said repeatedly, I wish we knew when things might start to return and cash might start coming back into the system. I don't think that's to say that I did say don't borrow money from the bank. I didn't mean never borrow money from the bank. What I kind of mean is if you need to go to the bank and the bank is willing to provide some money to tide you over, make sure you do it on a very, very carefully planned basis. Manage your working capital, forecast what your expenses are going to be, and go to the bank with a properly structured business plan on how you are going to ride out the drought, if you'd like, in the expectation that the rains will fall again in the future. But don't overextend yourselves, and remember, of course, that the bank is unlikely to lend to you on an unsecured basis. So you have to think that if the bank is going to lend you a few million here and there, that you'll have to provide some sort of security. So those are, key considerations. I hope that as few of you as necessary are going to go down the route of borrowing from the bank. But at the end of the day, if you want to stay in business, if you believe that your firm is a good firm and has a future, and you want to keep your staff on the payroll, then you have to look at these kind of options.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hani. To the participants, you can still keep on sending your questions. We'll still have Mr. Hani on, and after the next presentation, we'll come back to him. We'll now move on to our second speaker of the day, Ms. Caroline Mutunga. Karaoke. Ms. Caroline will take us through leading and motivating the legal teams, and also financial planning and future-proofing for your law firm. Carol, you're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. It's a delight and an honor to be here. I just want to sort out my screen share. Just give me one moment. Things seem to have gone in a different direction. There you go. All right, great. So it's an honor to be here, and it's great to have so many people on the webinar. So far, I can see we are at about 126 participants, and this is coming across the region. So that is definitely a delight. Now, my task here is very varied, and possibly because in my work, I find myself dealing with different law firms and looking at their operations across the board. So not in one particular area, but generally looking at the operations and how we can be able to make law firms more efficient and more effective in what they do. So first up is around leading and motivating legal teams. And what I plan to do here is to look at it from the perspective, yes, from our current situation that we are operating in a different kind of scenario, but also from a general place, because we are where we are today, but we will not be here forever. We do not know what the future looks like, but it is definitely going to be different. And what we need are basic principles and skills that can guide us going forward. So question is, how do we ensure that we're able to lead and motivate our teams in whichever scenario that we are in? And one very important thing for us to do is to ensure that we have a goal. It's very difficult for us to lead a team when we don't know what it is that we are moving towards. So we need to ensure that we have a goal. And my experience has been that a lot of the times the founders of law firms and the partners in law firms are pretty clear about what it is that they want to accomplish in the firm. But when you speak to the rest of the staff members, whether it is to associates or to other members of the team, you find that that goal is not quite clear. So we, as the leaders in our firms, need to ensure that we are very clear about what it is that we want to do as a firm. And this covers many different areas. This covers issues like financial targets. It looks at areas such as the practice areas that we want to go into or that we want to expand. It looks at the clients that we want to target, the industries that we want to be relevant in. It looks at even staff members. What kind of staff are we looking at attracting and retaining? What kind of an employer do we want to be known as? And when we look at the wider world, even what kind of awards are we looking at going after? Because once we're clear on the kind of awards or the kind of goal that it is we want to go for, then we can be able to structure our firms in a way that starts to get us towards those goals. And as we put down those goals, and I'm sure you have heard this in many different areas, we need to ensure that our goals are SMART. And SMART simply means that they're specific. It's something that you can state very clearly for somebody else to understand, that it is measurable. There's a way in which you can go back and double check, counter check that you are actually meeting this particular goal, that it is achievable. And this is not to play down having stretch goals, but also not for us to go on flights of fancy. If we have regulations that really limit what it is we can be able to dabble in, then there is no point as a law firm stating that you're going to be running the most successful medical practice as part of your goals, because currently in our regulatory framework that won't be possible. However, you could say that you will lobby to ensure that law firms are able to handle those kind of things. Also important for you to be realistic about your goals, and here it's really around realistic towards what it is that you want to accomplish. If you are looking at becoming one of the top law firms in the Chamber's global survey, then you need to be clear about what are the things that need to be done and getting them done. So if, for example, you need to be in a situation where you are handling certain caliber clients, then you have to target those clients if that is the goal that you want to accomplish. And then finally, your goals need to be time bound. You cannot have a goal in perpetuity. It is not enough for you to say that I will be mentioned in the Chamber's Global as a top lawyer, but because then whether you make it this year or you make it in 30 years, then it doesn't really matter. So you have to be very clear about what are your timelines, because that then is going to determine how much effort you put into it and the resources that you're going to be dedicating towards that. So now that we have a clear goal and we are sure about what it is that we want to accomplish, I want to bring in an element that for majority of us tends to be a little different, and this is scoreboards. Scoreboards are used in sports all over, and this is what tells us how we are doing at any given point in time. My question to you would be, do you know how you are doing? Do your staff members know how you are doing? Do they know what it is that they are trying to accomplish? And do they have a way of telling when they're doing really well or when they're not quite meeting the standards that you desire? You have to have a way in which you're able to communicate this very easily, very clearly, that people are able to see and understand and can translate into action. When we think about watching a football match and we are able to see that if we are the home team, we see that we are at 1 and the away team is at 2, then we know that we need to work hard. We need to score an extra goal. If we are the home team and we are at 3 and the away team is at 1, then we know that our most important thing to do is to be on the defensive. So these are things that influence our strategy when we know what is happening on the ground. So we want to be sure that we are communicating this to our teams. And as leaders who are here, that is really our responsibility. Are we able to set up a system or a structure that tells our people where we are, where we are going, and therefore can quickly communicate when a change in strategy or a change in procedure is required? Now, in this time of COVID, the thing is, you might have had these goals previously, but right now you need to go back and assess whether these same goals are still relevant today. And this is going to be the case even as we move forward. So you might find that indeed you need to change your goals, but then in another 3 months, you need to change your goals again. So goal setting is something that has to be a continuous process. It's something that you have to continuously go back to, continuously communicate, and continuously review so that you always have a relevant goal that you are aiming towards. And when you have that, then it becomes a lot easier to rally your team because they have one significant thing that they are moving towards. Having said that, however, the question that I have for you, especially if you are in the leadership team of your firm, is whether you actually have a team or whether you have only staff members. And this is because for a lot of people, people turn up at work simply to earn a salary. And when you have people turning up to work to simply earn a salary, what tends to happen is that they then lose the motivation to do the things that will make the difference. They then tend to have a silo mentality, which means that people will only do the bare minimum that is required to get them from point A to point B and nothing further. This means that your cleaning lady will pass a client at the reception desk and go in and do her cleaning without finding out whether that person has been served. But when you have a team and you're working towards a common goal, then it means that everybody is invested in ensuring that you're actually getting to do the things that are necessary for you to achieve that goal. So we need to ensure that we work towards turning our staff members into a team. And once we do that, that means that we start to work together. We start to lift each other up. We start to remove obstacles from each other's paths to ensure that we're able to move things forward. And if we look at the different people that exist within a law firm, it's very easy for us to be in a situation where we just keep ourselves in our silos and don't really think about how we can help the next person. Case in point, if we think about the role of an accountant in the law firm, their role is really about just checking where the money is going, ensuring that it has been kept safe and that it is growing. But many times people complain that the accounts department is acting as an obstacle, that they are not providing funds as needed, that there's a lot of delay. Now, for you to have a team, it means that the accounts department needs to be very clear that they are an enhancer of the business, that their actions can make or break a transaction, and that their responsibility goes beyond entering numbers in ledgers, but goes towards ensuring that the clerk is able to get the funds they need when they need it, so that the client can be served well and ultimately the firm can shine. So we therefore need to be sure that we have that kind of a mentality. And here's the big question. How do we then ensure that our team is together, that we are all working towards one particular goal? And the number one answer to that is engagement, engaging our team members. And engagement here is really mostly about communication. And just as the slide on the screen shows, communication is messy because it's not about you as the leader of the firm standing on some podium and shouting to the rest of the firm that, hey, we need to achieve $1 million revenue this quarter and leave it at that. No, it means showing your team that you care. It means speaking to them about their own lives and their own goals. It means engaging with them in the different areas that they are in. And we are currently in a situation where we are so different, we're so diverse in our organizations, whether it is around the schools that we attended. Today you will find that not all lawyers will come from one university, even if they're in the same firm. You will find that we are all of we have different economic backgrounds. We are of different age groups, which means that even when we're communicating, we need to be very clear that our 60-year-old partner and our 22-year-old associate are able to receive this communicated and translate it into something that makes sense to them. So we have to invest in communication. We have to be careful about what we communicate. And communication is not just about the words that we speak, but it is also about how we say them. It is about what we choose to do. And if we are leaders, it means that what we choose to do communicates even more than what it is that we are saying. Just to give you an example, if you are trying to build up a serious commercial department and you are in constant meetings with people who are in the M&A field or in banking, but you decide to show up in jeans and a t-shirt every single time, then your staff members will start to think that it's okay to show up in jeans and t-shirt, even if the dress code says that they need to be in a suit. So that is communication that is not verbal, but that is very strong. And then it becomes very difficult if those two are not in congruence. So we have to ensure that what we say, how we say it, and what we do is congruent. And even now in this time of COVID, this is even more important because our staff members are facing a lot of information coming from different places. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how we should operate. There's uncertainty around people's health. There's uncertainty around people's economics. So if we are able to provide one level of certainty, then as leaders, that is our responsibility. We need to provide that level of certainty just to keep our staff members comfortable and at peace so that they can be able to deliver. And then we need to ensure that we do this consistently. Yes, right now it might seem that we're really calling upon this and people might feel that because we are in extraordinary times, yes, we're going to communicate, but then when we get back to the office, we move back to business as usual. No, if we do that, we will lose out on all that amazing team spirit that we'll have been able to build up in this time. So we must ensure that we keep it consistent, that the communication flows throughout and we don't break it down. So this is just to say that we are in extraordinary times. And in that case, we must take extraordinary measures. A lot of lawyers that I speak to are not comfortable speaking to their staff members about their goals, about their dreams, about their career paths. And as a result, we are losing out on a very rich culture. So right now we are in extraordinary times. Let's take up the challenge. And even as we deal with a lot of operational issues, as leaders, we can go the extra mile and we can put in place these extraordinary measures. But then you might say, you know what, this is just too much. This is too much on my plate, Carol. You're asking me to do too many things. Well, as leaders, that is our responsibility. It is to take ownership of what it is that needs to get done and then ensuring that it does get done. Now, I hope you have heard the difference in words there. It is our responsibility to ensure that things get done. It is not our responsibility to do every little thing. And the way we do this is a matrix that I am sure you have seen in various forms over the years. And this is the 4 quadrants of how we should prioritize our work. And the first priority is really around the things that are most important to the practice. And importance here is not just about the things that make money, but importance is the things that impact the firm the most. So these could be things that positively impact the firm, but they could also be things that negatively impact the firm. So anything that has a great impact on the firm is your greatest priority. So if it is staff members' morale that needs to be dealt with, then that is your most important priority. If it is a discussion around whether or not a certain practice area is profitable or if it is leaching you of finances that could be better utilized elsewhere, then that is your most important task. So those are the things you need to really concentrate on first. Then the things that can be postponed but still require your personal attention would then need to be scheduled. And now when you schedule it, we need to be very careful to ensure that we don't just place a simple word in our scheduler, whether we are using diaries or online calendars, whatever form your schedule takes. We need to ensure that we put down our things in such a way that when we get to them, it's very clear what it is that needs to be done. For example, if you are considering whether or not to get into a certain line of business or whether to stop being in a certain line of business, it might not be the most urgent thing you need to deal with, but it still is something that needs your attention. Now, for you to put down in your diary, consider conveyancing department and just leave it at that, it means that on the day you get to that item in your diary, you might be confused as to what it is you are supposed to be doing with the conveyancing department. So it is better for you to put in place in your diary a clear note that says, consider whether conveyancing department is still a viable business plan, or consider whether we should move into conveyancing department, speak to Mr. XYZ about it. That way, when it pops up, you're very clear about what it is that you need to do and you can get straight into it without having to scratch your head about it. Then we need to delegate. We need to delegate. And delegation is not an easy thing. It is not even necessarily a very natural thing because we tend to build up a certain level of expertise. We tend to build up a certain level of relationship with our clients and with other stakeholders that we deem to be very, very dear to us. But the thing is, we are human and it is just simply not possible for us to do absolutely everything. We need to draw in people. We need to draw in others to help us with the things that need to get done. And if you find yourself hesitating to delegate, then you need to stop and ask yourself, why is it so difficult for you? Is it that you do not have the right people on your team and therefore you don't trust their skills and you don't trust how they're going to get stuff done? Is it that you don't have systems within your organization, within your firm, and therefore you're not too sure if things are going to be done in the way that you desire? Is it that you have not provided the necessary training to people that they are very clear, when I meet with a client, this is how we do things. We ensure we take notes. After the meeting, we do an email, we confirm our discussions. 2 days afterwards, we call up the client. Is it that our people are not clear about what it is that we want? So we need to be sure that we delegate and that we delegate well. And the way to delegate well is to ensure that the person we're delegating to is very clear about what it is that we would like them to do, why it is that that thing is important to us, and how it is that we are going to, how it is that they're going to get it done. So if there's a specific procedure to be followed, then we need to communicate that as well. And then finally, we need to create something called a don't do list. And these are all those things that are on your table that really you shouldn't be doing at all. You shouldn't even be delegating them. And you might say, everything I do is important. Maybe, maybe not. But just take a look at all those things and then decide what it is that you can sacrifice so that you can have more time to spend on your priority items. And if you're to look at it in a different way, this is really a question of selecting which balls you are going to put aside as opposed to juggling everything and then accidentally dropping something, which then has greater ramifications. So think about the things that you don't need to do and just put them aside and forget about them for a while or even forever. So having done all these things and having listened to all of that, I think really what I'm saying here when it comes to motivating your team is that you are the one who is in control. You are the one who is in charge of your team. And it is really up to you to define your goal, to review it often, to communicate it with your team consistently, to show your team that you care so that they too can care for your business, and then to support them to get the work done. And in supporting them, this could either be through providing the training, through providing the necessary equipment that they need. And in this way, you will be able to help your team achieve that one goal that you're really looking to move towards. And that is it for me from the side of motivating your team. I just want to ask Barbara. Barbara, I have, I think, 2 more things that I'm supposed to speak about. Would you like me to go straight into them or take a pause there first?
Carol, due to time constraints, maybe you could just go into it and then we'll take questions at the end. Okay.
All right. Very well. No problem. All right. So moving forward, Richard spoke a little bit to this around financial planning. So where he had already touched on things, I'll just gloss over. And although I'd been asked to speak about future-proofing your law firm, the more I thought about this, I figured that, future-proofing is not something that we are really able to do because we honestly have no idea what is in the future. However, we do need to think about business continuity, that whatever it is that is happening in the future, that our businesses continue to be sustained through that period. So as I go through this part on financial planning, it'll really be from the angle of business continuity as opposed to really future proofing. And again, it goes down to having a goal. What is it that we want to accomplish? And when we think about business continuity and about financial planning in particular, it's really about how your business will afford to continue achieving its goals and objectives. And this is very different from being profitable. We've all heard of profitable businesses that have gone down because of other factors, whether it is financing or capital or investments. So it is not just about profitability. It is about affording to achieve your strategic goals and objectives, which essentially means that it's down to cash flow. It's all about cash flow. And cash flow really can be broken down into 2 sides, the in and the out. So if we start with the in, when we talk about cash flow and increasing cash flow, one way we can do this is by increasing our cash in. Now, I'm not going to go into business development. I think EALS will try and get us a session that is specifically around business development because it's a really lengthy and deep subject. But when we think about the operations around increasing your cash in, one of the most important things is purely billing. Are you billing your clients? Are you communicating what your clients are supposed to be paying? Now, many firms tend to discuss their fees with their clients, but then they never put it down into writing. And what tends to happen is somewhere along the way in the course of the transaction, then there's a bit of a discrepancy around what the client expected to pay and what you, as the lawyer, expect to be paid. So we need to ensure that we get rid of this fear of talking about money. We are running businesses. We need to speak about the money. At no point in time would you walk into a supermarket and find that they have hidden the prices, because if they do that, you'll just walk out. So why is it that we find it so difficult to communicate that, we are in this for money? So we need to discuss the fees upfront with our clients. And once we've done that, reduce it to writing. Communicate it, whether it's by sending a fee note or sending a follow-up email. Ensure that you communicate this fee to the client. What this does is that it notifies the client that this is serious business, but also it ensures that if there was any discrepancy between what your expectations were or what you understood in your discussions with the client and what the client understood, then they have an opportunity to come back to you and just clarify that, so that even as you move forward, then it's very clear what it is that you expect and what the client's obligation towards payments are. And then here I want to add, please stop doing free work. And by free work here, I'm not talking about the pro bono cases that we take up on behalf of the better good of the community, or where we are acting on behalf of people who are not financially capable. I mean, stop doing free work for your friends who come in and because they have decided to put up a house, you decide to peruse things for them for free. Because what tends to happen is a lot of firms do this with the hope of getting more business. But I'd be very interested if we could run a poll and find out how many of those friends actually come back and give you significant business. In the meantime, by doing the free work, you are demotivating your staff members because you're holding them to account and asking them to make money, and yet you don't want them to bill money. And when they come to you and ask for a pay rise, you say there's no money. And they wonder, if we were billing your friends, then perhaps we would be making a bit of money. So please stop doing free work. Find different ways of engaging with your friends and don't do free work. Then also when it comes to increasing the cash in, we also need to ensure that we collect what is due to us. And this means, and this goes back to the element of documenting what we agree as fees. We document it and then we follow up, and continuous follow-up always helps. For a lot of lawyers and a lot of firms, the feeling sometimes is that the follow-up of fees should really be something that is done by the accounts department. But we need to remember that as the lawyers, we are the ones with the relationship with the client, which means that we have a bargaining chip that our accountants don't have. So unless you're dealing with an organization where it is the accountant dealing directly with the accountant on the other side, it is better for you to have the one-on-one dealings, because then you're able to have a discussion that focuses around the work that is being done for the client, the value that you are adding to the client, and therefore the reason why they need to pay you. And then finally here, please be consistent. Don't record it today and then for the next client tomorrow you don't record it. Don't follow up on one particular matter, but then in all other matters you just let it slide. Be consistent. Ensure that you continuously follow up. And even in this time, as we are facing reduced income, having these records really helps us, because whereas a lot of companies have reduced their spending, they are bearing in mind that they owe money to different suppliers. If you have it on record, it gives you a better chance of going in and negotiating and saying, you know, we've been doing work for you for the last year and you owe us X amount of money. So far, you haven't really met up to your obligation. Can we enter some sort of an agreement for you to pay us, even if it is slowly, because then that provides you the cash flow that you require to run your business. So ensure that you keep that record and ensure that you keep up the relationship with your client so that you can continuously follow up. The second part of cash flow is about the outflow of cash. And here I remember there was a question around reducing costs. And here I just want to say that as you manage your existing cash, be careful not to have a cost-cutting exercise that simply cuts costs for the sake of cutting costs. Because when we do that, it's very likely that we end up reducing our capability to earn money in the future. If we decide that we are going to get rid of all our staff members because, well, we don't want to pay a salary, then when you get a brief tomorrow, you don't have anybody to do the work. And that means that you're not able to earn that income. So rather than looking at it from a cost-cutting perspective, what I would like to urge us is to look at it from a cost rationalization perspective. Look at your expenses, figure out which of these are adding value to your business, which of these are critical towards ensuring that you're able to do business tomorrow. Then those that are not, now start working around them and seeing how you can reduce them without affecting your bottom line. And as you do this, then you're able to continuously reduce what it is that you're spending without necessarily compromising on the quality of work that you're able to do. The other thing that I would urge us all to do is to create a slush fund. Now, this we have heard in our personal lives. We're always being told to ensure that we save money, ensure that we have 3 months to 6 months of expenses stashed aside so that in case of hard times, we have something to draw back on. I'd like us to do this for our businesses as well. And a slush fund is really about you taking a percentage of your income and putting it aside. And this can be done in good times and in bad times. But what happens is that when it's just a small percentage, and you can always start small and build it up, start with 5% and just say 5% of every amount of money that comes into the firm shall be put aside. And that way you build up that muscle that in case you fall upon lean times, then you're not having to run to cut your costs because you have something to rely on, something that allows you to take a step back and think and strategize on how it is that you're going to move through and navigate through the tougher times. And then finally, please meet your statutory obligations. Not necessarily because they end up doing too much for you, but because the penalties are crazy and you do not want to have to start dealing with tax authority penalties when you are also trying to deal with landlords and staff members and other suppliers who are also demanding money from you. And these days, negotiate. Go see the tax authority. Let them know things are thick right now. I don't have the finances to meet my obligation. However, I know I have this obligation. Can you allow me to pay you in installments? They are allowing this. They're accepting this. But you do need to be willing to go there and speak to them and negotiate that with them. And with that, you will be able to reduce how much outflow you're getting and manage your existing cash. So when we think, so far we've spoken about the financial side of things, but business continuity is not only about finance. It does encompass a lot of other things. Some of them are performance management. How are you ensuring that your staff members are actually delivering what it is that you desire for them to deliver? Your accounting systems. Do you know how much money is coming in? Do you know how much money is going out? Are you profitable? Are you in debt? Are you at risk of losing out in terms of your capital? Understand your accounting, invest in your accounting. Do a bit of risk management. Assess where is the risk? What are the things that are likely to bring me down? How do I combat them? How do I mitigate them? what are the triggers? What are some of the things that are likely to be triggers that will show me that things are not going very well? And once you have those triggers, do you have a plan? And Richard spoke about ensuring that you have a task force that is continuously available, and that's a great idea. So do you have that kind of a team that is just scanning the horizon to see when danger is coming and start working at a plan before you find yourself, in the midst of things that are bringing you down and you now are having to scramble purely to survive? So business continuity is not just about the money. It has so many other factors in. And what I'm going to be looking at is more around the human resource side of things to ensure that we don't skip over that. So when we look at the human resource side of it, the thing that we need to assess is what are our critical positions. And critical positions here does not only refer to our lawyers, it also refers to every person whom we feel if we were to lose them today, our business would not be able to continue as we know it. So this could be, for example, your accounting department. It could be that you have a clerk who is so good at what he does that you know you can count on him through thick and thin. So we need to understand what are our critical positions. Once we do that, we map out their competencies. What is it about this person that makes them so indispensable to us? And then we start out working out a strategy on how to ensure that they're not so that we're able to get around it, that we understand what it is that they bring to the table and what is our plan B. So do we need to train somebody? Do we need to have somebody shadow our clerk as he goes about his business? Do we need to bring in a junior accountant to learn the trade of our senior accountant, so that when our senior accountant goes on leave, we're not left wondering what to do? Do we need to do training for our lawyers so that then we know that if Carol is the best lawyer we have in M&A, then she needs to teach the other lawyers all about M&A, so that when Carol is not available, we don't tell clients, I'm sorry, we can't take your work because, well, Carol is on leave or Carol isn't well. So we need to have that strategy. What strategy are you going to employ to ensure that that competency is being met? Then once we understand the strategy we're going to employ, document it. Now, the reason we document it is because we don't know what will happen tomorrow. Documenting also means that we have an opportunity to review our thoughts and just look at whether or not what we're doing is making sense. And documenting also means that even for us as the leaders in the organization, then we don't have to worry. If I, as a leader in the organization, I'm not there tomorrow, then I know that people are still going through the business continuity planning. They're still going through the succession planning. And then just as with our goals, we need to continuously review, because today it might be your clerk who is in your critical position, but then after you've gone through your strategies, you might find, you know what, actually the clerk is no longer so critical. Now we need to work on our receptionist. So it's a continuous process, something that must be looked at all the time. And then we need to look at our stakeholders and manage our stakeholders. And stakeholders are numerous. We have our employees, we have our community, we have our local authorities, we have our regulators. How are we engaging with them and ensuring that even they understand where we are, what we're looking to accomplish, and what role do they play in ensuring that we are able to continue our businesses going forward? Richard spoke about engaging our regulators. Is that something we need to do? Is that something you can do? Maybe you need to engage with your staff members and just tell them, you know what, things are really tight right now. You have seen what is happening. Ask them for ideas. What can we do? And they will come up with the ideas. Do we need to think about our environment? Maybe we were operating in an office where all the businesses have shut down. Are we feeling safe there? Are we feeling secure? Do we need to engage with the landlord and just find out what it is that needs to be done to ensure that our business does not suffer drastically? So we need to engage with our stakeholders to ensure that we are continuously moving things forward. And then just to say this once again, It is a continuous process. Everything locks into each other. You cannot do your financial planning and skip your succession planning and skip your risk management. Each of these things comes together to help us ensure that our businesses move forward for tomorrow. Now, the third item that I was tackling is on technology, and I did see a couple of questions asked previously relating to technology. So I'll try and cover those questions even within the course of the presentation. But given the time that is there, it's going to be pretty short and really looking at what it is that we need to ensure we are doing in this time of crisis around our technology. Now, as lawyers, we are said to be slow in technology, but I don't think that is necessarily true. A lot of the times, I think our slowness really comes from our environment. And for the longest time, the people we engage with have not been in technology. So there's really been no need for us to dive straight into it. But that has changed. And whether we like it or not, right now, we have to dive into technology. So what are some of the things that we need to think about? So first thing we need to think about is our stakeholders. What is it that our stakeholders require of us when it comes to technology? So for example, our clients. If we have clients who are very technologically savvy, then that forces us to be technologically savvy. We have clients who insist on having their own systems with regards to managing their matters. So we need to ensure that our systems are able to play into theirs as well. We have a much younger workforce right now who are very technologically savvy. So they are also using technology in ways that we may or may not be fully on top of. So we need to engage with them and understand what is it that we need to be doing to ensure that our staff members are not feeling like they're not able to work within the confines we have set for them. What about our government bodies? Our courts, our registries are now more and more moving into technology. What is it that we need to do to ensure that our systems are communicating with each other? But then most importantly is to ensure that we're not just doing technology for technology's sake, but rather that we do technology to be more efficient, to reduce our costs, to work faster, to get our job done better. But before we do that, I just want to urge us, please look before you leap. Don't jump into anything simply because it is being demanded of you. Take a moment and think about it. And thinking about it isn't looking to your neighbor and saying, oh, Carol and Associates are now running on G Suite, so I think it must be a great system. I think we need G Suite. And then you purchase G Suite, only to discover that it doesn't quite answer the questions that you need answered with regard to your technology. So be clear about what it is you want to accomplish with your technology. And then do your homework. It always amazes me that lawyers keep on saying that they are not technologically savvy, that IT is not their thing. And here I want to challenge you. As lawyers, we are constantly dealing with industries that are completely new to us. We are dealing with laws that come into effect, just by a signature, and we have to dive into it, and we learn these things, and we're able to navigate them and read the agreements and translate them and get our clients to understand them better. So why is it that we feel so handicapped when it comes to IT? I would like to suggest that our mindset is really what stops us. So can we change our mindset from that of IT is not a lawyer's strong point to IT is a necessary part of what we do as lawyers? And even as we do this, as we get to understand all these areas, also have the humility to come around and say, you know what? I have understood what I need. I have understood what is in the market, but I am not the expert. And let us stop taking expensive decisions. Let us stop taking big decisions without consulting an expert in the field. So my question to you is, do you have an IT guy? If you do not have an IT guy, whether this is a person who you just call, whether this is somebody who you're on contract with, you need an expert in IT who, when you have a thought around technology, you can bounce off ideas, but you don't bounce off ideas when you are blank. First, do your homework, get as much understanding as you can about the technology, then seek out your IT guy so that you can have a good discussion around the technology that you require. And once you have that discussion, then that allows you to move on to the next question. Is it worth the money? Is it worth the money that you're going to invest? Technology tends to be quite expensive, and it tends to come with a lot of hidden costs. When you decide to move your system from a basic, let's say an accounting system, from a basic Excel system, and you decide to bring on board an ERP, chances are you're going to have to upgrade your hardware. Chances are you're going to have to upgrade your server. Chances are you're going to have to install some sort of firewall. Chances are you're going to have to enter a maintenance contract. Chances are you might need to bring on board a full-time IT person to support you. Are you ready for those costs? And even if you're ready for them right now, more importantly, what is your return on investment going to be? Is it just a question of seeing funky machines in your offices, or is this translating into additional business? Is it translating to reduced cost? Is it translating to better efficiency and therefore faster turnaround times? So you have to consider the money factor of technology. And even now, as we go through this season of difficulty and enhanced technology, don't just jump straight into purchasing new technology. Consider the cost. Consider the return on investment. Do some window shopping. These days, we generally don't have just one type of technology to answer one problem. You will find that there's several different solutions that are out there. So do your shopping, do some window shopping, get some demos, involve your team in the demos, because you as a leader are only able to see a software or a piece of hardware from one perspective. Get your accountant's perspective on it, get a junior associate's perspective on it, get a partner's perspective on it. Because once you have that kind of diversity, then chances are by the time you're making a decision, your selection is going to be all encompassing. It is going to have factored in different points of view, different skill levels, different personalities, different ways of engaging with clients. And in this way, you get the best possible deal that you can. Now, I just want to go briefly into the different types of software that are in existence. Now, as you can see, there are quite a number, so I will not go into them in detail, but these are just some of the things that you want to think about as you think about your technology. Practice management systems, things that help you manage your matters. Accounting systems are straightforward. I think given the time constraint right now, I'll just go into some of the less common ones. So time tracking and billing. If you are running a commercial practice, then chances are you're going to be doing quite a bit in terms of time-based billing. And if you are, then you don't want to have to keep on asking your lawyers to try and remember how much time they spent on a particular brief. It might be worth your while to invest in a time tracking software. If you're thinking about, if you do loads of documents and you find yourself continuously acting in projects, then maybe a document assembly software is something you want to think about. But all that said, all of these softwares are things that can help you, but they're not all necessary for each and every practice, which goes back to what I said. Be clear about why it is that you want to get into a software. What problem are you seeking to address? And as you get into this, then you want to be clear that your software speaks to each other, because there's nothing more annoying than having one type of software where you input data and then tomorrow when you need the same data, you have to input it into a different system. So try and ensure as you buy your software that you get software that communicates to each other, that is able to import information from one place to another, so that then we can talk of one point entry of data. Once you have captured a client's name, then you never have to capture it again. This reduces errors, and it also reduces the amount of time that we spend doing things. And as we move forward, we also want to ensure that we factor in the cloud. because even if you are currently on a hard server, the way the world is turning is that everything is moving to the cloud. Now, it might be that right now your server is just fine and you don't have to move to the cloud just yet. But since all software is slowly moving to the cloud, as you get into fresh purchases, ensure that it has cloud capacity, that you can access it off the internet, and that you're able to work from practically anywhere. And right now, there's a lot that is available, and this is the time to go in and get those demos, because right now all these technology companies are giving a lot of demos and are giving a lot of freeware because people need the technology. Also think about where your technology is going to be used. Previously, when we thought of technology, really it was just about the desktop. But right now, when you buy your software, chances are it's going to be used on a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, and a phone. Is it compatible? Can I be able to do my time billing off my phone? And when I sit down at my machine, at my desk, I can still be able to access the same data. That's speaking to each other is what makes it more efficient. So as you get your demos, as you think about your technology, please ensure that you're very clear about where it is going to be used, and that these systems are going to be able to talk to each other. So in conclusion, when you think about your technology, these are my 4 points for you. 1, don't rush. Take your time in making your decision. Then do your homework. Don't enter into purchases blindly. Factor in your costs and the return on investment. And remember that with IT, there are a lot of hidden costs. So be sure to ask the questions. Will I need to upgrade my hardware? Do I need to upgrade my server? How much is it going to cost to maintain this system? Is the update for free or do I have to pay for it? Ask the questions around cost and ensure that you're getting a return on your investment. And then finally, ensure that you consult an expert. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will be that for now. So over to you once again, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that session. It was very informative, very thought-provoking, and quite insightful. There are a number of questions here. The first one, Carol, is this is from Ange Irakoze. Carol, the question is, how can it be assessed? How can it be assessed that we do have a team or staff members within a law firm? Is there any tool that could help to assess it apart from using communication? And what can be done for engaging the whole staff members towards a team spirit?
All right, I think let me take, I think I can take that, and then as you scroll up to find the next. So there's no tool. there's no tool, there's no magic tool for ticking and saying that, yes, I have a team. But I think the biggest question that you can ask yourself and ask your team members is, do they know what you want to accomplish? If they do, then chances you have a better team than if they don't. Also ask yourself, do you know what your team wants to accomplish? If you do, then chances are you have a better team than if you don't. So there's no one thing that will tell you that, yes, I have a team, or no, I don't have a team. But taken collectively, it's really about, are you working towards meeting a common objective? So that common objective has to be known. And whereas it's not only about communication, communication is the tool that you're going to use to determine whether or not you have that team.
Thanks, Carol. There are a couple of more questions here. Cutting down on unimportant staff. You talked about cutting down on non-important staff. What happens to those staff in terms of humanitarian grounds? And then there's also a question. Carol, hey Carol, any suggestions on the systems that you believe can help to cover the above needs that you have just said?
Okay, so let me talk about the staff first. Now, cutting staff is never easy. It never is, and it goes back to, again, communication. Do you have a system of communicating with your staff? Are they aware of where the business stands? And chances are, if you have been running an open business where staff members are able to see what is happening, they have a sense of trust in the organization, should it ever come to a point where you need to carry out a retrenchment, then you can have open discussions with them, and just, they will also see where things are coming from. And what I have seen with a couple of clients is that if you're able to have such open discussions, then it doesn't make it easier for the staff member, but it does remove the element of, I don't know what word to use, but just that feeling of I have been betrayed by this organization, because it means that you will have continuously had discussions. And if you remember, I talked about a scoreboard. It means that they will have been looking and seeing that our scoreboard is showing that we're doing badly. Our scoreboard is showing that we're doing badly. Something has got to give. So by the time you're having the discussions, it doesn't come as a surprise. And it means that you can also be pretty forthcoming with what it is that you can and cannot do. Now, in the event that you find yourself in a situation where you don't have that positive relationship with your staff members, then it means that that discussion is going to be very difficult. And this is where you find organizations really just issuing a letter and a check, because they're not able to have that discussion. But that kind of a scenario, whereas yes, it might be legally sound, it does remove the element of having your former staff members as advocates as advocates and cheerleaders for your firm, because your former staff members are the people who are going to go out there and they're going to say, oh, I used to work with Carol. It was an amazing place to work. It was so sad I had to leave. Or, oh gosh, Carol just let us go, and all she did was give us a letter and a paycheck. She's so inhumane. So same scenario, same thing that happened, but a completely different narrative depending on how it is that you end up communicating this. The second question, I think, was around systems, which systems I would recommend. Now, systems really depend on your need, and systems abound. What I can do is I can share with David a couple of systems that I have worked with, and not necessarily to recommend them, but for you to take a look at and request for the demos. So then you're able to see, is it addressing my need? Some of these systems are only practice management systems and are only able to address that one side. Some of them have a combination of practice management and accounting, for example. But maybe you already have an accounting system that is working perfectly, so you don't need the accounting system. So ultimately, the system you choose is going to depend on your need and what it is you want to accomplish with this particular system.
Carol, two last questions before I go back to Mr. Hani. Do you reveal your finances to your staff? And secondly, you talked about the team leaders providing certainty, a level of certainty to their team members. What happens in the event that this particular leader is also uncertain? How do you deal with that as a leader?
I think that one should have gone to Mr. Hani, but I'll take the one that came first on whether to reveal all finances to your staff. Now, again, different firms are going to have different cultures. Some firms are going to be very open.
Before you proceed.
I'm sorry?
Carol, before you proceed, one last one.
Yes.
On the issue of billing,
mm-hmm.
You stated that we should not be afraid of billing our clients. Mm-hmm. But in this current pandemic, there are clients who come to you and say, oh, I really need your help, but I don't have the money. I'll pay you soon. I'll look for money. What do you do with such a client?
Mm-hmm.
How do you communicate to them?
Okay.
That as much as you want.
All right, so I'll start off with the element of openness of finances. And like I said, different firms are going to have different cultures. And if your culture has not been open, then perhaps this is not the time to open it up. Otherwise, you open a Pandora's box. However, you must remember that your team members or your staff members are watching what is happening. They're not blind. So if you have been billing some amazing fee notes, you've been bringing in the money, and they're the ones who are following up on collection, and their accountant is their friend. They know what is coming in. They are watching you, and they're saying, oh my goodness, in this day and age, this is the day that the managing partner has decided to go and buy himself a brand new Porsche Cayenne. They're watching, and they may or may not get the right message, but they will have perceptions. And we always say that, everybody's perception is their reality. So you need to then be able to weigh how much of that do you want to leave in the hands of the staff's imagination, and how much of it do you want to provide? Because generally, as human beings, where we are not provided with a narrative, we supply it for ourselves. And usually we supply it to the negative. So think about that as you think about whether or not to open yourself up in terms of finances. You might not have to open up your books in totality, but then you do want to be able to be open enough for people to know when things are going well, when things are not going too well. And that should be able to reflect even in how the firm is treating its members of staff. When it comes to, let me take billing because it's related. When it comes to billing, and in this day and age, when a client comes to you and requests for a discount, what should you do? Again, there's no straight answer for that, because what is your relationship with this client? Is this a client who has supported you through thick and thin previously, and therefore now you might be willing to give them that kind of a discount? Is this somebody who's purely coming to take advantage? Are you willing to put yourself on the line? And I think at this stage, for me, what I would say is the one thing you need to think about is, what is the long-term effect of this one transaction that you're going to be providing this discount? If you give a discount today, when they come back in January 2021, hopefully things have improved, will they imagine that that is going to be the same level of discount that they're going to be offered? Are you going to be able to have an open discussion and tell them, I know that your business is currently suffering and I want to support you, so I'm happy to give you a discount, but please understand that it is only on this, for this one premise. Throw in a bargaining chip for yourself. Tell them, can we then enter into a retainer with you so that then we're able to continuously support you? Are you able to put it out and say, this is a once-off, next time round, we'll just negotiate on that particular instance? But always remember that whatever it is you enter into, you will have to live with the consequences long-term. So just think about that even as you negotiate with it, and make sure it doesn't then become a habit, because then it can become very easy that, it almost becomes that, this client gets a 50% discount, and that always becomes the thing. Then finally, on the issue of certainty, and I think I'd also like to hear Richard's view on this. What happens when the leader is not certain? I think as a leader, you have to try and figure it out. And if you can't, you have to communicate it in a way that doesn't spread panic amongst your staff members. Because again, your team members they're not blind. They can see what is happening. If they see you running around like a headless chicken, they'll panic and everything goes haywire. So you have to collect yourself, think about it, speak to your peers, find out what they are doing. If you have a mentor or somebody who's been through more in life than you have, speak to them, get advice, and then come do what you have to do. Stick to your guns, communicate clearly, make sure people know where you're going. And even when you have that lack of certainty, even communicating and just saying, guys, currently we have no idea where this particular area is going, but this is what we're going to do for the next 2 months. We will review the position in a month's time. So that already gives a sense of peace. Somebody knows, for the next 2 months, we have something we are working on, and it shall be reviewed, and it looks like our leader has it in control. All right, back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Carol. Mr. Hani, even as you deal with the question on certainty for the team leader, there's another question here which I'd like you to, Carol has spoken about it, but maybe you could shed more light on it. Baston Woodland asks, how do you strike a balance between maintaining client relationships and keeping the firm financially stable, since most clients are equally not financially stable at the moment? And then there's Lorna Juliet asks, there's a new normal where clients are now asking for a refund of part fees initially deposited before the pandemic. Now, how do you handle this in a balanced and mature manner? And then lastly, even if you explain and communicate to your staff financial status, why do you need to let them go? How will they survive the pandemic? What if they don't get another job? Maybe Carol will go back to you on that one, but Mr. Hani can deal with the first two questions. Thank you.
So the question is around certainty of leadership and succession, is that right? So I don't think there is a definite answer to that. It depends perhaps on the type of law firm that you're referring to. If it's a 2 or 3 partner law firm with 4 or 5 employees, that is a different issue around succession and should be relatively easy to agree between the partners who are involved. If it is a larger firm or even a big firm, then yes, the succession question takes time to work its way through. It needs to be very carefully managed, and you need to prepare well in advance. And there's nothing that upsets an organization more than uncertainty. And even if you don't necessarily disclose or reveal who the successor to either a team leader will be or even to the senior partner, I think as long as people know that there is a process and there's a system which will evoke or produce a result, then they can take some comfort in that. So it's a difficult process, but actually a lot of the time, succession is a corridor talk. People chat about it and say, who's going to do this, who's going to take over? And actually so much talk goes on that in fact, a lot of the time, the speculation proves to be absolutely right. And there are no big surprises. So I think that's possibly the way to go if you want to maintain the firm, is to make sure that there is some continuity in the discussion. And then the other question was about refund of fees. Is that right? Was that the third question? Sorry, what was the second question you wanted me to deal with?
On billing, how do you maintain the balance between billing and the client relations?
Again, if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be a man, and we would all be very happy. It's a question of, and this is where sort of building proper relationships with your clients is so important. The more long-term your relationship with a client is, the easier it is to talk about money, and the easier it is usually to get paid, and then usually the easier it is to get paid at the correct level or correct rate. So build the trust and confidence between yourself and the client, and you'll find those discussions easier to handle. Clearly, it'll be easier as well for you to negotiate with a client in a current scenario where they may say that they have cash flow problems or so on. It's easier for you to understand that and maybe agree to some concessions, either payment plan, installments, or maybe a discount, if you have a good relationship. It's much more difficult to settle that kind of debate with a new client or somebody who comes through the door, as it were, and offers to engage you to do some work, but then says, well, by the way, I don't have more than, a few bob to pay you now, and we'll pay you much later. I think that's a pretty risky route, even at the best of times, and it's not one that I would recommend getting involved in. And certainly in the current scenario, someone like that, we wouldn't take on work from a client asking for that kind of arrangement without taking a significant upfront deposit, payment on account, which we would hold in our client account and would bill when we've done the work. So that's a way to protect yourself.
There was a hand that was raised. Alfred there. Alfred there, you had raised your hand. You can proceed to unmute your microphone and ask the question. Alfred, please unmute your mic.
Even your camera.
As we wait for Alfred to come back, maybe we could tackle two last questions before we go to the closing remarks. Richard, there was a question on clients who are asking for a refund on fees initially deposited. How do you handle that?
Well, the answer is I don't know, because unfortunately I've never been in a position where that's been required on account of hardship. I mean, it depends on whether you've done the work. If you've done the work and you feel you're entitled to bill and debit the fees from the client account, from the deposit, then you should do so. If you haven't done the work and you're still holding their money, then it's easier to refund them. But again, back to what Carol said, what I said earlier, it's all about communication and building a sense of understanding of what they're trying, what's best for you or what works for them. So pick up the phone, have a conversation, understand what's going on, and so you're not obliged to refund money if it was paid to you on account of fees and you have done the work, and you fulfilled your side of the contractor by providing the legal advice. So as long as there's no dispute about whether you've done the work, it shouldn't be a very difficult conversation.
Very well, Mr. Hani, thank you for that. Caroline, you could deal with this last question before we go to your closing remarks. Lorna Juliet Engunyu asks, how do we get our clients to understand that this new normal, that this is a new normal, but also build them because we have provided the same services, albeit virtually?
All right. Now, I can see different scenarios playing out here in terms of court attendance, in terms of having meetings. But I think ultimately it does boil down to what work were you supposed to be doing for the client? And are you able to communicate the value that you are still being able to provide despite not having a face-to-face meeting? So it might be that even for us as lawyers, we need to be more open to having the Zoom calls and Teams calls so that our clients are able to see us. And then also that we are able to discuss and let them know that even if we're not meeting face-to-face, work is progressing. Are we communicating that on email? Are we sending them their documents? Are we progressing a transaction? Is it a court matter where we heard? Did we have our applications heard? So I think we would need to continuously communicate. And even more so now that we're not able to meet face-to-face, especially if your clients are accustomed to coming to your offices and having a meeting with you, then we do need to be able to provide them with that assurance that we are still there, we are still working on their matter, we are still progressing the transaction, and continuously have that communication. Once they're at peace, then chances are they will still feel the value, but we do need to provide them with that peace of mind. And I think given that this is new for the clients too, then we also need to communicate how are we going to progress going forward. Can they expect Zoom calls? Can they expect conference calls? Should they expect more of them or less of them? The more we communicate and the more we put the expectations out there where they're very clear, then the easier it shall be.
Thanks, Carol. Mr. Hani, there's a question here from the former president of the Law Society of Kenya, Mr. Okero. He asks, social media. One minute, sorry. Social media does indeed pose potentially serious reputational challenges when inappropriate matters get spewed out. Does that not place upon us all as advocates an obligation to maintain the highest standards of decorum on social media, at very least to maintain the high moral ground, as it were?
Well, if that's addressed to me, greetings to Isaac. Nice to hear from you. And you know, for me personally, and for my lawyers, we try to stay away from social media, which has the ability to run away with you. So Twitter, I think, is a very potentially dangerous thing, because it can run away. It can be very helpful, but it can also run away with you. And so too some of these other platforms, probably ones that only my children understand, and I certainly do not. I think using social media for constructive, creative outreach and business development purposes, maybe Facebook is used a bit by some law firms, but certainly LinkedIn is the one that professional services tend to use. But there again, that is not inviting. Usually that is very well mannered and well structured. So you know, my advice always is to avoid social media in that context. If you do have to get drawn into it, first of all, absolutely maintain higher standards. Turn the other cheek. Do not respond to inflammatory material. And if you have to, then for goodness sake, take advice first, and or even talk to somebody who is in the world of social media, public relations, and so on. So the higher standards of decorum, good manners, polite language, integrity, and I think people will respect you for it, even if you don't necessarily successfully argue against whatever challenges or points may be made about you on social media.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hani. There's so many questions coming in right now, but unfortunately, we're not able to take all of them due to the time constraints. At this point, I'd like to go back to Carol for her closing remarks.
All right. Thank you very much,
Carol,
and thank you all for the questions, for the interaction. It's been exciting. And here's the thing, there's no way we can cover everything. So everything that has been said is really just the tip of the iceberg. We do need to go in. We need to do a lot more reading, a lot more asking, find out what other firms are doing in other countries, and take what it is that we can and what looks like it'll work for us. Experiment, share your experiences, and develop a network that you can be able to go to with some of these things, because you want to be able to just bounce off ideas. But thank you also to the East African Law Society for this forum. It has been very, very, very good. Thank you all.
Do you want me to say a couple of things in closing? Well, I think it's been said by Carol. I'd like to thank her. She's done a very comprehensive topics, and she says there's a lot more to be done, a lot of detail. And thank you to the Law Society. Particularly thank you to participants and your questions. I hope it's been helpful. We're unquestionably in a period of rapid transition, with no real certainty about how things will be. And of course, lawyers were innately a conservative bunch of people. We like certainty. We like a rule book. We like to see process. And at the moment, there's pretty rough seas and choppy water and high winds outside. So it's difficult. I would just hang on to the basic principles about why you become a lawyer, and serving your clients and looking after your staff, and obviously look after your families while you're at it too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hani. I'll proceed to read 2 or 3 comments from the attendees. There is from Herbert Ziwa. He says, thank you so much to the panelists. It was quite for so much insight. From Senior Evans Monari, he says, excellent presentations, and is very grateful. From Lorna Juliet, she says, thank you for addressing her questions. Many people are asking for the presentations. They will be shared on our website. A number of you are also asking about CPD points. Unfortunately, this particular training does not have CPD, but for us to get CPD points, it requires us to work with the various national bars. We'll work on that for future presentations. Mr. Okero is thankful to you, Mr. Hani. He says a big thank you. Michael Okelo says to Carol, good to hear from my classmates and good to see you. All in all, the attendees are very grateful to the panelists. You've done an excellent job. I believe I speak for everyone when I say I've learned a lot, and I'm going to try and apply the knowledge you've imparted on us this afternoon. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to our CEO, Mr. Amol, for the closing remarks. Thank you for staying through the entire session. Mr. Amol?
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for the well-guided discussion, and appreciate each and every member who managed to stay through the 2 hours plus an extension. Much appreciation to Richard Hani and Carol Mutunga for really dedicating their time, their energy, and for giving us their best, especially to conquer the challenges that each and every one of us are going through in our enterprises. To our team at the East African Law Society, David Sigano in the background, Achilles, Elmad, thank you for the organization, and to all the national law societies represented in the discussion. I wish each one of you a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We'll keep you updated on the future trainings. Thank you for sparing your time, and I wish you all the best. Stay safe, keep well. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.